Hey everyone, welcome to Latter-day Struggles. This is your host, Valerie. I don't have Nathan with me today, although I have been doing most of this series with him. I guess it's kind of been off and on because we started it without him, and then I've had him with me for a couple of times. And then, alas, he's not here again. But there's a good reason for that. The reason is this. As I was putting this series together, it occurred to me that I've already actually talked about one of these 5 tenets of radical wholeness in another episode a little while ago. And so what you're going to hear today is actually a little bit of an overview and a way for me to kind of create, I don't know, a little bit of an arc of I'm wanting to put this episode in that you're going to be hearing here in a minute. But before I do that, I wanted to kind of open things up and sort of tie everything together so this makes lots of good sense. And so that's what I'm doing today. So we are on episode 5 of a 7-part series. I know I used to say a mini-part series, but I've nailed it down. We're at 7 parts. Episode 5 of a 7-part series on how to achieve radical wholeness. Okay, so you're my people because you're on the Latter-day Struggles Transcending and Including 2.0. You're my Friday Fellowship. You are hungry for a deepening, broadening understanding of spirituality. If you're anything like me, I didn't have the words for it, but as the years went by in my Mormonism, I was finding myself dying of boredom. I kind of thought I wasn't a very spiritual person because it just wasn't like satiating me. And now I can't get enough of it. And so to that end, I thought this series might resonate with you as much as it has with me. It's 5 tenets that help each and every one of us achieve the deepest possible awakening of our consciousness.
And I think that was a really good model for our kids. And I have not brought myself to that point yet. In fact, our kids have pointed it out to me. They've said, how come mom does it and you don't?
I'm dying for this episode to unfold because I'm actually dying to know why you still don't do that.
Well, you're the therapist. You're about to hear my blob. Okay. In my faith journey, I have come to a total and complete understanding of, well, I say that. I mean, I openly acknowledge the evils of patriarchy and the damage that it does to both men and women. Don't need to rehash that. We've talked about that quite a bit in this podcast. Okay. But when I was a child, I had a lot of trauma as a child from a father who was very domineering and very patriarchal. And I am aware of the effects that had on me. And I have personally tried as my own version of a father and a husband to not emulate some of the things that patriarchy would normally pass on from father to son. I have tried to be aware of those things. Okay. But I have still a shadow that I have not been able to fully heal from. And that is a desire for a stronger matriarchal, a stronger feminine energy that I wish had been more present in my life when I was a child. And so even though I have tried to move from a lower rung of patriarchy to a higher rung of non-patriarchy, I don't know if there's a better term for that. One rung that I have struggled with just personally is really trusting and feeling that there is an equal power in the feminine because it was never modeled in my life. I can say no to the evils of patriarchy, but I am still trying to work through what I felt like was a feminine power that should have been in my life and wasn't.
Right. Okay. And so prayer can expand to, and this is where I was thinking of these connections. I happen to know that there's one place that you love more than anything and where you find God the most deeply. It's out in nature.
100%.
It's out in the water. It's on the river.
Yeah.
And I see and feel, I can't speak for the crowd here, but I see and feel more deeply connected to the feminine divine when I am near the water, when I see a sunset. Mm-hmm. And so I guess I'm just wondering if you could imagine the next time you're out on the lake or on a river or looking at a sunset, what would it be like for you to pause and connect with the energies of the feminine divine, as opposed to, maybe you need to not think of it as a female or a woman. It might work, it might not, doesn't matter. But do that from this place of not petitioning an external figure, but being present with the feminine within you and the feminine that is resonant, emanating from this beautiful earth.
That's fantastic. I love that. Thank you.
In other words, to go forwards in development, we have to go backwards too. We can't just press forward and pretend like those things don't exist, or that they don't get in the way, or that they don't cost us energy, because they do. And it's challenging stuff. I do a decent job of working with people with trauma, and yet I have some of my own that feels like it's really sticky. And yet I persist, because I feel to my core the reality that for us to grow and develop, having a healthy relationship with all of our wounds and all of our shadows is part of the wholeness journey. Even just acknowledging that we have wounds and shadows in and of itself, I think, is a marker of health. And the more we confront these things and love on our earlier selves and talk about them and address them, they become integrated with us, and we become more and more able to expand to higher and higher degrees of consciousness development, which is spirituality. That's what we're here for, is to remember who we always were. And this is part of the journey. So I hope this made some sense. Couldn't be more grateful for all of you. Thank you for those of you who are in this Friday fellowship, who are profoundly committed to your evolution and your growth and development. Hopefully it's helping in some ways you, but I also know that this journey, as you grow, it reverberates to all of the people around you. This is a magnetic experience. The energy that you bring with your growth expands far beyond you. And I'm just so grateful that we're on this journey together. Thank you all so much. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Latter-day Struggles. If this podcast has supported your faith journey, we invite you to explore the many ways you can continue your healing and growth with us. On our website, you'll find support and processing groups, marriage and parenting courses, and free resources to support where you are in your faith journey. You can also join Valerie in the live fellowship gatherings throughout the year, where we connect, process the podcast, and build meaningful friendships with others on similar paths. If cost has ever been a barrier, we offer podcast scholarships funded by listener donations. To explore all of these offerings, visit the link in today's show notes or go to latterdaystruggles.com. And if this podcast has been meaningful to you, leaving a 5-star review is one of the most powerful ways to help others find this work. Latter-day Struggles is proud to be part of the Dialogue Podcast Network.
Dialogue Podcast Network.